This is We Need to Talk with Dr. Darcy Sterling, where I give you the tools and skills you need to love better so you can live better. I am Darcy Sterling. Something you may not know is that I spent the first 15 years of my career teaching relationship skills to adolescents and their parents. I loved working with teenagers. I was the right combination of rebel and rule questioner that the kids I worked with really needed in a therapist. I think it made me more trustworthy and easier for the teens to connect with. Now, I don't know how many thousands of families my practice worked with in that decade and a half, but the experience gave me access to enough that it left me with some strong opinions on how kids learn social skills, which are relationship skills. But as much experience as I have, my guest today could probably lap me at this point in her career. She was someone I met when I needed to refer young children who weren't yet teens to a therapist, and she practiced in a way that I continue to admire today. And that is why I knew I needed her here for this conversation about how children learn relationship skills. Dr. Jennifer Weberman, thank you so much for being here. Full disclosure, I supervised you for a period of time years ago. And for those of you unfamiliar with the term, supervision is when a therapist hires a colleague who's got some more experience in a particular area of practice, and you meet with them regularly to discuss and receive feedback on the way in which you're working with your clients. It's such an important part of our work, which too few therapists engage in beyond the requirements. We're all required to do it to get our licenses, but most people stop their supervision there, but rock stars continue throughout their career. And you, Dr. Weberman, you had your license for years when we worked together, and I was so impressed with how you think about families and how symptoms manifest in children and the role that parents can play in resolving those symptoms. Very few people practice the way you do. So let me back up and start by asking, how do you describe your specialty and why did you choose it?
Excellent. So first of all, you were fantastic. I was an early career psychologist and you believed in me when I was too inexperienced to know that I had something of value to give. And you boosted my confidence tremendously. So I'm very grateful for that. So my specialty is with children and families. And you mentioned that when you worked with teenagers, you just speak teenager, right? So I've always just gotten children. No one needs to explain to me. There's always something to learn, but I can connect with a child. And I believe that all children really just want to be taken seriously and they want to be enjoyed. And if you can have a conversation or play a game or connect with a child and they know you are taking them seriously and you're enjoying your time with them, you've got them. That's a beautiful connection. So, but you can do 1,000 things with that skill. So how did I get into this place of like parent coaching? And so when you and I first met, I operated from a completely different way of being. I was so behavioral. And now I'm in this new paradigm of connection-based parenting. So when I met you, do you remember the show, The Super Nanny?
I do. Oh my gosh. Yes, I'm familiar with Super Nanny. Carry on.
Oh my gosh, it doesn't surprise me that we would have this in common. So yeah, I was obsessed with the show, especially the one with Nanny Joe Frost. So, you know, if you're not familiar with the show, it's a reality show. So they'd first show you a family in chaos. The kids are like hanging from the ceiling and everyone's misbehaving. And she'd come in with the tight bun and the glasses and the British accent. And she'd come in and do like timeouts and like Pinterest-worthy behavior charts. And, you know, she'd get that family in line. I mean, she used a timeout for anything. If you didn't say like, please and thank you, or use your fork at the table, like you were in a timeout. And at the end, because it's a reality show, they'd have like a montage with like nice, happy music and the family's like frolicking in a field because everything is, you know, okay now. And I would eat that up. And not only did I eat that up, but in my private practice, people would pay me to come to their house and super nanny their kids.
I did not know that. I did not know. I did not know you made home visits, but that makes so much sense. You know, as a social worker, we're trained to be flexible and be willing to do stuff like that. And I am totally down for a home visit. I sometimes there's a soft threat of don't make me come to your house with my young adults. But anyway, back to you, Jen.
Yep. Oh, I mean, like that's like the good stuff, right? And your natural environment, your natural habitat. Because a kid comes to my
100%.
office and they're going to behave, but if I go to their house, there's going to be an opportunity for me to like, this is how you do it. Time out. Like, I'm going to super nanny your kids. And I actually got that reputation. And why did I shift away from that? Because, okay, first of all, like it was feeding in to our need for control in major ways, right? Like, who doesn't want to feel like I've got control over this kid? And how many messages do we get as parents that we're supposed to be in control, right? Your kids are
Mhm.
out of control, or that parent's not controlling their kids. So when parents come to me and I can offer that, that's like, the good stuff, right? But like, what were we actually doing? We were just like squashing little spirits when we had no understanding of what was motivating the behavior in the first place. We didn't
Mhm.
understand, we weren't even curious about it. It was just like we need to stop it so that we can feel in control. Because when we feel in control, that voice in our head that tells us we're not good enough, we're
Mm.
bad, we're unlovable, we're not perfect. When we control our kids, then we feel like, okay, maybe I am good, maybe I am worthy, maybe I am a good parent. And that's not healthy, okay? Because this bullshit about control, it's like we're just like, drinking the Kool-Aid. It's not about control. It's about connection and understanding. Why is that child behaving that way? What is that child trying to communicate? What skills does that child lack? What is their sensory experience of the environment? Is there executive functioning challenges? Is there a reason they're emotionally dysregulated? Is there something going on at school or at home that's, driving the behavior? When we are not curious about that stuff, then we're just squashing spirits. And for those people who are listening, are like, well, I'm not a parent. I don't have kids. I don't work with kids. This is not relevant to me. I would say if you think of the behaviors that we can see and then what it communicates underneath, like an iceberg. So on top, you see like, I'm stubborn, I'm rigid, I'm too sensitive, I'm having a tantrum, blah, blah, blah. But underneath the surface is like the cause of that. When you were a kid, there was something that you displayed that was not understood and was labeled. So you were labeled difficult. You were labeled stubborn. You were labeled overly sensitive. You were labeled with something. And it's
Mm.
because the adults around you did not understand what needs you were trying to get met with that behavior. And it's usually boils down to a need for safety and a need for connection, right?
Mhm.
You had a need, a very developmentally appropriate need, and you were displaying it the best way you could, but you got that label, and that label was never true about you. So I just want every adult who's listening who grew up hearing that to know you were always good, you were always worthy, you were always lovable, you still are, but we carry those wounds around with us, and that's what you see when you work with adults.
I
And
mean, I'm doing my level best to fix them. I'm doing my level best to fix them in the young adults that I work with. But in your defense, Jennifer, I am going to run interference here. And look, perception is reality. When I worked with you, it was not my perception. And I interrogate everyone in my life. My mother said I came out of the womb. I didn't have first words. I had first questions. Why and why not? And that is how I lead in my life in every area of my life. And I certainly questioned your thinking. And there is no way I can't recall specifics to land on, but there is no way on earth you were not curious about the kids that you were working with. What I hear you saying to me is that you felt like you were a little heavy handed in trying to focus more on behavior than on the root of the behavior.
you are spot on, Darcy. What I realized is that in my life, because I was a babysitter, I was a live-in nanny, I was a live-out nanny, I had worked with kids, I had nieces and nephews. I would never do that stuff in
Hmm.
real life. It wasn't me. It was who I thought I needed to be because people were paying me. People were like, here's a
Mm.
check. Every single time I come to you, I'm like, I've got to be good enough. I've got to be where it was coming from. Like, I'm not enough. This is what all of our shit comes from. Like, we're not enough. So then we do all this other stuff and we're just vomiting our stuff onto other people. Right. So I always was curious, but I felt like as soon as I went into private practice and people were paying me, I was like, I got to give them what they think they want, which is to be able to control their children. And, I wasn't doing it in individual therapy, but yeah, if you had a kid who was throwing tantrums, I'm like, all right, we're going to do this. We're going to do this time out. But now I'm upfront with people when they call. I'm like, you're not going to get any of that stuff from me. What we're going to do is slower and deeper, but we'll change the trajectory of your and your child's life and your relationship.
Tell me what caused you to pivot there.
So there are people in the field who I have read and just deeply resonated with their work. Whole Brain Child, Dr. Shefali's work.
I was just wondering, are you a Shefali fan?
Oh yeah. I mean, her early stuff, conscious parenting and the awakened family, all of that hit on so many pivotal points for me. And it kind of gave me permission to like, this is actually what speaks to me. This is what resonates with me as a human. Oh, I have permission to be this way. And then becoming a parent. And I'm like, I'm not going to do this stuff with my kid. Why am I doing it with other people? I'm going to do what feels like me. And I'm not for everybody. If you want that stuff, no judgment. Go and get it. There's like 1, 2, 3 Magic and all those books out there, but I'm going to do what resonates with me and fulfills me. And let me tell you, when I have a parent call and I explain that, more often than not, they say, actually, that's what feels right for me, but I thought that I had to do it differently. I thought I had to be different with my kid. That's actually what I want. What I want is what you're describing.
And how has it changed, if at all, the outcomes of the work that you do?
So I get a little emotional when I talk about this because it's just so exciting. But when a parent changes the way they interpret their child, the way they view their child, they become an advocate for their child. So then when the school is doing what they used to do, but they've learned not to do, then they speak out to the school and say, hey, that's not what you're supposed to be doing with my kid. Whereas before we're like, oh, school's the authority figure. I can't question them. I don't have a degree in education. No.
Early childhood education and development. Yeah.
They're still doing like, oh, if you don't sit still, I'm going to take away your recess. What? I mean, first of all, in the state of New Jersey, it's against the law in public schools to take away recess. You're not allowed to do that. But that kid who's misbehaving is dysregulated. He's the kid who needs to move the most. You take away recess. I mean, you're shooting yourself in the foot, but it clearly shows we don't understand. So parents become advocates. And then we're going to talk about this later when we get deeper into triggers, but our children trigger us like that. It's their job.
I have to tell you, becoming a parent myself gave me so much empathy. I'll throw a Yiddish term out. It gave me so much rachmanis for the parents I worked with over the years. And I understood it differently, that pull to be liked against the pull to be the parent, the pull to be in harmony against the moral imperative to hold boundaries and guide and let go. That is a real rub that I could never have understood. Parenting is not for the faint-hearted. When people say it's the hardest job on earth, they're not shitting you, and it is not for the faint-hearted. It is a heavy responsibility, and it is a privilege, and it comes with a burden. Like everything worthy.
Yeah, because we have to do our own work. What you just described, the pull, so everyone's got a different pull. So that was your trigger. And I think the fact that you are educated and you did this professionally and you're married to someone who did this professionally, you might have even had higher expectations of yourself. You might even be like, I'm going to do this different. I'm going to do this better.
And I think part of the rub that you were talking about a few minutes ago that I felt was because I had 15 years of a career where I was I was the cool aunt. I was the cool therapist. I did not have to work hard to connect with the kids I worked with over the years. That's sometimes at odds with parenthood, being
Mhm.
the cool, liked person in the room. You
You're
know,
not always going to be liked.
no, not if you're being a good parent.
Yeah. And it's not even about that. It's about connection. We're going to change the whole framework of like, oh, in order to be a good parent, I have to be unlikable sometimes because discipline makes you unlikable or boundaries make you unlikable, which makes people afraid to set the boundaries because they're afraid they're not going to be liked. Children actually want you to set boundaries. They're not going to say thank you. Thanks
No,
for, setting this limit with me. Thanks for limiting my screen time and making me eat vegetables. But they want to know there's boundaries because that makes them feel safe. And we're talking about, we can get into attachment, but like attachment is feeling safe, seen, and secure.
and
Um,
being safe is about being able to predict your environment and how your behaviors will change your environment. And when your parents are preoccupied with themselves, are inconsistent, or are moody because they struggle with their own issues,
mhm,
and their responses are not consistent, then the child has nothing to pick up on. And the child, that's how attachment disruption happens and adaptations happen.
mhm.
So tell me an example of a family that comes to you. What's an example of a parent that comes to you?
It's such an interesting question because I would have answered it differently before the pandemic. So I'm not speaking for everyone's practice. I'm speaking for my group practice. The calls for kids 8 and under is like 80% of the calls that come in. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8-year-olds, sometimes even younger. And
Wow.
when you think about, so, the filming of this is really good timing because we're basically at the year 4 mark of the shutdown because it was 4 years ago. So think about where those kids were developmentally when that happened,
Wow.
what they missed. Some of them were attending virtual kindergarten. Some of them couldn't go to preschool. Their parents were working from home and stressed out. The demands on the teachers. And if you are a teacher and a parent, you're doing Zoom school with your students while your kid is on their laptop doing Zoom school at the same time. It was like a really messed up time. And we were all living in this cave. And so what did they miss? And this goes all the way through college, right? Like certain kids missed their first year of college because they were virtual. So I'm focusing on the kids who are calling. These are the kids who missed some major developmental milestones during this
Mhm.
really wacky time. And I believe that this generation of kids is going to be defined by the pandemic, just like kids who lived through the Great Depression were defined by that. This is going to be a historic thing, and we're going to study this, 20 years from now, the outcomes. So now everyone's behind. We're all back in school, but it's not normal. There's no going back to normal. The teachers are stressed. The kids didn't get the skills they were supposed to get for each of the grades that they were in. So now they're behind, which means they're not ready for the next grade. Parents are still stressed. It was a rough time financially, and it was a rough time just being home and working, and your kids are like in your space, and no one had space from each other. So we're
Mhm.
all living in this very intense period of time. And so all the calls are for these dysregulated kids. I mean, sometimes it's like, oh, is it ADHD? Is it anxiety? I'm just going to umbrella term it because when you're little, like eh, you can
The
give certain,
diagnosis is irrelevant.
yeah,
A child that's
regulation.
uncomfortable is going to be emotionally dysregulated, and that's going to look like behaviors the parent doesn't want to deal with or that are difficult for the parent to deal with.
Or because there's so much on social media about parenting content now, content that some of these parents are watching these people on social media talk about like, oh, I'm watching Dr. Becky and she's giving me this script, but like I'm trying it at home and it's not working. And Dr. Becky's fantastic. I'm not pooing on that, but like you get these scripts or you get this content and you're trying it at home and it's not working. So a lot of parents really want to be a better parent to their kids. And yes, there are some parents that are just like, fix my kid, but I'm not the auto body shop. You can't drop your kid off here and I fix them and then you pick them up at the end of the day. Like it's not that. We've got to do the work inside, but they're all dysregulated. And you think about the environment that we're living in. Our culture is so unhealthy. It is too much too fast, too loud, too intense. And so, nervous system wise, we're all bombarded. And so, if parents are not okay and teachers are not okay, and the kids are not okay, we're all just feeding off of each other. I can't change the culture, but I can make a parent more aware of how they can adjust their household so that it accommodates. So it's like the safe place to like recocoon your kids after they come home after this really intense day. Like Darcy, if I asked you, what do you remember most about first grade? We're similar in age. We're probably not going to say, oh, the amount of homework I got is what I remember. Like it was so much homework. Like what? I don't think I got homework until like late elementary school, if at all. These kids are getting homework in kindergarten, first grade, second grade, like preschool sometimes gives a homework. It's like, what are we doing? This environment is so unhealthy. So we want to just work on regulation skills. But the bad news is, good news, bad news. You can't teach your kid regulation skills if you don't have them yourself.
Right. And so that is why you work with parents as well. That was the cornerstone of when we worked with teenagers, what our mission was. We would not, and I used to use a very similar analogy. We did work with very wealthy families, middle class families, and wealthy families. And these are parents who are running the world. And they were accustomed to dropping their kids off, picking them up after therapy. And I was like, no, no. You want your kids seen in this agency, you come in for parent coaching, which is just code for psychoeducation. But we didn't want to pathologize the parents. So we called it parent coaching. And it gave us an inroad to be able to teach the relationship skills that the parents needed so that they could be regulated, so that their kids could learn from their parents who are modeling these much better behaviors. Because in the absence of teaching people, all of us, parenting skills, which we should be learning in high school before we graduate, since most people go on to have children, the subtext to that is that we should be born with parenting skills, that these are innate, they're natural, and that if we need them because our kids are not acting the way we want them to act, or they're suffering from anxiety, depression, or something else, it all feels like such a smash to the ego of the parent that I didn't blame the parents. I blame society. I blame the fact that we don't teach relationship skills. We don't teach anyone how to parent, and we don't teach people relationship skills. And quite frankly, they're the same. It's redundant. It's the same shit. The same shit that I have to learn to be in a relationship with my wife is the same stuff that I had to teach parents and kids to get them to communicate properly together.
100%. Preaching to the choir.
Yeah.
I have to say that I won't work with a family that won't let me provide that parent coaching. It's just we're not a good fit. And with teenagers is also a little tricky because I want to get the teens' consent to speak to the parents. And sometimes they're just not okay with that. And sometimes they are. They're just like, just don't tell me anything. I don't want to know. Just do it on the side. And I don't tell the parent anything that the teen has told me in session. I'm just giving education to the parent. But right now, what I see is most parents are hungry for it. They really,
That's wonderful. What a great
they-
paradigm shift that was
huge.
so missing.
It's huge. And it doesn't mean it's easy. They'll say, okay, I want to understand my child better. I want to understand my teen better. Help me with a connection. I'm like, well, here's a different way of looking at your child. Nope. They're lazy and they're stubborn and they're difficult. And if they would just stop doing X, then I wouldn't have to yell and scream so much. So it's like you change, so I'm less uncomfortable. And so what I do is we go into the triggers. This is love. I love to talk to parents about triggers. All of our triggers, the buttons that our kids push for us, they come from the past. They're like breadcrumbs. I see a trigger. I want to know what your triggers are. Is it when your kid is loud? Is it when your kid's making a mess? Is it your kid is being disrespectful? Whatever it is, I want to know what it is. And then we're going to follow that breadcrumb trail to your childhood, where you learned that that is not okay, because we're going to find it. And when we can identify it and know that it's there, that creates the sacred pause. When you have a kid who's pushing your buttons, It's a gift because your kid is basically saying to the parent, this is where you haven't healed. And I'm going to push this. They're not trying to do this, but I'm going to push this button until you work on that. And you have to in order to change the patterns of your family, or else your kids are going to have the same experience that you had. And most of us probably don't want our kids to have the same experience that we had. So it's a blessing, but it's a challenge, and it's messy, and it's hard, and it's not supposed to be perfect, and it's not supposed to come naturally. It's going to be so difficult and so worth it that you're going to be so glad that you did that.
And to what extent do we set parents up to have a more difficult and challenging job being parents because we now all live in these pods? And so, what used to be a communal effort is now on two people who are required to work to make enough money so that this child can have the resources that they need.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. We've become less interdependent, and there's less multi-generational households. There still are, but there's less of that. And we live further and further away from our community, and it creates a sense of burden. There's a limited amount of parental resources that you have. Parental resources are time, energy, money, things like that.
Hands, other hands,
Other
another set, like another set of hands.
Yes, your support network. And so if you are limited on those resources, that puts tremendous stress on the parent, and it impacts the whole family. And it's nobody's fault. This is just the society that we're living in now. You can have a 2-income family, and that barely supports what you need. And if you have a child who's a high support need kid who has multiple services that they need, that's driving time, that's money, that's time that kid's not on play dates, and those are necessary things for that kid. And then, for some families, when one child has some high support needs for medical reasons, for psychological reasons, developmental delays, all sorts of reasons, the child who doesn't have that, they feel guilt over that child. And that's a whole, I could talk about that for a really long time. But yes, we're harming ourselves by not having that network. And, my parents just moved to Florida, and we don't have grandparents that can just swing by and babysit. So we have to hire a babysitter. We have to find a babysitter who's available. So all these things definitely impact families.
When I worked with parents, it was not unusual to say that their kid who had needs, whether it's depression, anxiety, whatever it was, whatever behaviors or challenges that the child had that the parents wouldn't have requested of God when they were in the womb, they so often would say that these are symptoms that the kid came out of the womb with, essentially saying that it's the nature versus nurture debate. And I'm curious, what percentage of the time do you attribute a child's presenting problems to genetics versus environment? How impactful can the environment be? And these are probably two different questions. How impactful can an adjusted environment be in diminishing the symptoms?
It's a great question, and I think we'll be discussing it as therapists till the end of time, nature versus nurture. So there definitely is, a personality and disposition that a child comes out of the womb with, right? And there's also just the DNA, what runs in the family. So if lots of anxiety runs in the family, your child is going to be predisposed to anxiety. But there's also goodness of fit. So I knew a family who had one single child, and then the second pregnancy was triplets. And the one single child was a good sleeper.
Wow.
And then they had triplets, and 2 of the 3 triplets were good sleepers and 1 was not. And so if that family had 3 kids, not 4, and they were all good sleepers, they probably would have been like, well, I'm pretty good at this sleep thing. But then this one child comes along and says, like, I got a different disposition. I have different needs. Sleeping is not easy for me. And, it throws off that theory, right? So here you got triplets, they're getting the same sleep routine because they're sleeping in the same place, but one's different, right? So then you look at, okay, well, what's the impact between the parent and that child?
100%, because that is going to impact the parents' resources, which is to say energy and patience.
Mm-hmm. I think it was Gabor Mate. He said, even in a house where there's multiple siblings, each one had different parents.
100%. I mean, and that's easier to wrap your head around when you see a difference in age, but you controlled for that by talking about the triplets, because they were all born at the same time. And I actually have never deeply pondered, other than when I work with young adults, which is every day of my life, and adults, how their childhood wounds impacted who they are today and informed their attachment styles. Help me understand how attachment theory applies to children and how early childhood attachment impacts relationship skills later in life.
It's a great question. So, what is attachment? We need children to feel safe, seen, and soothed. And that's what makes them feel secure. And so we're talking about secure attachment. And a small percentage of people have a secure attachment. The majority of people have an insecure attachment. So I don't want people to think it's like a death sentence, right?
It's literally like winning the childhood lottery, folks. I mean, I don't know if have you ever measured yours? I came out totally fucked. I was
That is on the actual score.
It literally, they were like, you're just fucked. That was my attachment score.
But look at you now. Like, it's not a death sentence, right? It's not like, okay, you have these attachment issues, therefore you can never have a healthy relationship. You just have to work really hard on it and learn the skills. But so as a child, great. If you're consistently, it doesn't have to be perfect, but consistently feeling safe, seen, and soothed, right? Then you feel that secure connection. And if there were breaches in the connection, there were healthy repairs. And that's important to remember, like, because
that's it. That's it. It's all about how you repair when you rupture.
That's exactly it. And repair has to be a real repair. Because if you keep doing the same thing and apologizing and do it again and apologizing and do it again and apologizing, that's not a repair. A repair is meaningful. It's honest, it's authentic, but it also doesn't have to be a very deep conversation. It could be like, so you just said something that you're like, all right, that was a stupid way to say it. I think I just hurt my kids' feelings. You'd be like, oops, I said that badly. Let me try that again. That's a repair, right? So another repair could be like, you know what? You were trying to tell me something and I was not listening. I was talking more than I was listening. Can you give me another chance? Can you start again? This time I'm really going to listen. And you listen, right? Or you guys had a big blowout and there was a tantrum, with the little ones and you lost it. Okay, we're human. I lose it. We're not supposed to never lose it. We're not supposed to be like Zen parents all the time. But afterwards, you go up to your child and be like, wow, that was really hard. You and I just went through something. I wish that I had not yelled as much. I regret that. And I apologize. I mean, can you imagine, Darcy, did your parents ever take responsibility for what they did, apologize, hold themselves accountable, and then acknowledge the impact that it had on you?
I don't think so. I mean, I got elements of that from my mom periodically, but the problem for me was you're apologizing for stepping on my foot, but you're still on it.
Yes.
As you're standing on my foot, you're apologizing for it. So that doesn't resonate with me. And it wouldn't with anybody. And so what I hear you saying is that it's about the parent taking responsibility for being a human being in the room. It's about them setting their ego aside and not having this idea that they can never be wrong in front of their kid or their kid won't respect them. Just the opposite. It's about coming clean and acknowledging when you made a mistake and saying, I want to take that back. Would it be okay?
The mistake you keep making, you have to get support so that you don't keep making that mistake, because you don't want to keep apologizing for stepping on someone's foot while we're stepping on their foot. That's not a repair. So we need to be working on ourselves. Parenting is about working on ourselves. I mean, that's the hard part, but it's also the beautiful part, because we really get to grow a lot, because our kids are always going to show us where we're falling short, right? So I mean, that's my parenting journey. My kid will call me out. And you know what? I learned when my kid was very young, My kid could tell when I was dysregulated before I knew.
100%, as do many of my clients. And it's so helpful.
That's beautiful because you're doing an attachment repair right there with your client. Because if they didn't have the experience that they could tell their grown up, you're doing something and it's making me nervous, it's making me scared, or I don't know how to interpret it, or it's making me feel a certain way. And that person was receptive and took the feedback and cared that it had an impact. They didn't have that experience. So, we always know in therapy, you're kind of just getting reparented, right? So if they can have that experience with you and they can say, hey, Dr. Darcy, you're doing that thing with your face, like what's going on? And then you let them have the experience of being heard and validated. Oh my gosh, that's great.
What are some things that parents can do to reparent their children if they have young ones? It doesn't even matter what age, because like you said, I am to some extent reparenting young adults and adults in my practice. So what are some secure attachment skills or little things that people can do to create a secure connection with the people that they love?
So this is where this type of parenting approach gets a little bit misunderstood. I don't know if you see on social media, but a lot of people call it gentle parenting or, mindful parenting or conscious parenting. But when people hear the word gentle, they think like permissive, like your child's, telling you off and you're like, sweetie, I've asked you 7 times not to call me an asshole. Like they think that's what gentle parenting is. So I don't use those terms. I use connection-based parenting. So this is where we do these repairs. When your child is having an upset feeling, you are staying connected. It doesn't mean you're staying sweet and kind and nice. It means you're staying connected. You're not saying, so your child is stressed out about homework and they're like, I hate homework. I hate school. I refuse to do it. And they throw their homework on the floor, right? So the old paradigm is, that's it. Go to your room. Or if you don't do your homework, I'm going to take away your iPad time, right? So the child is perceiving a threat. And that threat is the homework for whatever reason, learning disability, anxiety, executive functioning issues. I didn't move enough today, whatever it is. Homework is a threat. Now you've added a threat because now you're the threat. So now they're further dysregulated and you've broken the connection. Right? So everything you say to a child either builds a bridge or a wall. It's one or the other. So that was a wall. But the bridge would be to acknowledge, okay, what's happening for my child in this moment? You know what? I think they're hungry. I think they need to move. I think that this homework is stressing them out. I think they're getting too much homework and I think I need to tell the teacher to like reduce the amount. Or I need to join them and say, yeah, homework is awful. I agree. Like, oh, I can't believe we have to do this.
You can validate the feeling without endorsing the behavior.
Validate. And sometimes we agree and sometimes we don't agree, but it's like, yeah, you hate this. It just drives you crazy. So validate and connect and stay connected. So that's the piece of it. Your child is hitting a sibling and what you want to say is go to your room, but maybe they're hitting their sibling because there's a reason. They're like, they want your attention or someone at school is bullying them and they're just looking for someone smaller to pick on, or there's some sort of reason. When we're curious, we don't disconnect. We don't send them away or threaten them, which just activates further their threat response. So part of what you're asking me, the answer is that when we stay connected, we validate their feelings. We give them a name for their feelings. Kids don't know what their feelings are. There's just like this like a volcano erupting inside of them. So, we can give a name to it. So when we reflect back, and then we're showing them, I can handle what you're feeling. What you're feeling doesn't make you bad. It doesn't make you unlovable. We're not using this in words. It's the message we're sending. I can handle it and we're okay. I'm not rejecting you.
Because in the absence of that, the child becomes an adult who feels like they're too much. They're unbearable. If they were to truly tap into their feelings, they would repel the people that they love.
100%. And I always ask parents when I start to work with them, what feelings were okay to have when you were growing up and what feelings were not okay to have. So how was anger managed? How was anxiety? If you cried, what would happen? Who could you go to? Because in some households, anger is not okay, but worry is okay. Parent was good with worry, but not sadness was not okay, or
Mhm.
tantrums, big emotions. So I want to know how those feelings were managed by your parents because you've internalized that. And
Mhm.
now, so if anger was not safe for you to have growing up and your kid is angry, you have this alarm going off. Your amygdala is like danger, 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 and you don't even realize it. And so you've got to either appease your child because you're scared of the anger, like, what's wrong? I'll make it better, that kind of thing. Or we're like, that's it, go to your room. But it's all coming from how we respond internally to that emotion, which comes from how it was handled when we were younger. So, yeah. And then the modeling. So, you can't like tell your kid, hey, you're freaking out, calm down, take a deep breath. But like you burn dinner or something like that, and you're like, fucking like you're you can't expect them to rise to a level that's higher than you. They can't manage their screen time better than you can manage your phone. They can't handle a big feeling better than you can. If you're road raging all over the place and cursing out other drivers, but your kid's frustrated when their block tower falls down, okay, yeah, because they don't have a fully developed frontal lobe yet. Like,
Mhm.
let's be
And won't for decades, folks. They don't. It's
25
at least we think it's going
minimum.
into 30s now. We think it's going into 30s, early 30s, and we see brain development changes happening up until 33 in some
Woo!
cases.
That would explain me.
100%. It makes everything makes so much more sense. So, you know, the idea of like, oh, well, you're 18, you don't need parents anymore. Oh my God. 18 is such an arbitrary number. It's all
Yeah.
arbitrary. It's all arbitrary. When you were describing that, what I was imagining is like the kid on the subway who wants to is trying to throw themselves on the floor, but the parents like, oh my God, that floor will like kill you. Do not throw yourself on that floor. Or like in the supermarket, the kid that's throwing a temper tantrum. So what I hear you saying, and correct me if I'm getting this wrong or if I'm overly reducing this, is that we need to let them know that they're not too much for us. Just like we need to let our partners know that they're not too much for us and that we can sit in their presence and that we're with them, even if we're not endorsing their temper tantrum or their behavior. And we're acting kind of the way I didn't play sports growing up. I have no hand-eye coordination whatsoever.
Mhm.
Um, I was not a sporty girl. But what I imagine a coach would be saying to a ball player if they were like going pro or if they were in a D1 school, like that coach wouldn't just be like, well, you're just screwing yourself. The coach would be trying to talk the person down. Use your words. Try and tell me what it is you're feeling. I'm here to hear you. I'm with you.
With
And look them in the eye, that
Mhm.
kind of stuff.
Yes. And so this is where parents got to learn to play in the mess. I can say, look in the eye and say, I'm here with you. And your kid might love that. Your kid might hate that.
Right.
You're going to have to be willing to try because sometimes too much eye contact for a particular child is too much. They want you in the room, but they don't want you talking or looking at them. Some kids need a hug. Some kids like, don't even touch me. I'm going to end up whacking you in the face. You have to be willing to play around with it. And if you're bringing in that fixed mindset of I've got to do this right in order to be a good parent, you're not going to be willing to experiment. It's going to be hard for you to experiment. If you bring in the mindset of like, I'm just going to stay as connected as possible and I'm going to explain what that means, like put a pin in that as possible in this moment, then you can like go with the flow. Like, okay, I'm seeing that my kid likes this, but doesn't like this, or I just need to kind of stop talking a little bit and just be here. or they need me to talk because that regulates them. You got to play in the moment. So I have my little dolls here because I like to show.
Really?
Yes.
You're not kidding. Okay, I want to see. This is amazing.
A
I didn't
little
think it got any better, but here
kid
we are.
giraffe and the grown-up giraffe. Okay. So what's most important, more important than what you say or what you do, is how regulated you are on the inside.
So how well managed I am in my emotions, because
That
they fucking pick up on it. Animals and children can sense all the emotions. They do. You don't have to express yourself. They can feel it underneath the skin, even through the placid smile.
Yes, that is why some people will use the script and say it didn't work, because they were probably coming from a place of dysregulation. If I say this thing, hopefully my child will stop having this emotion. And I know that that happens when the parent said, I tried X and it didn't work. That's how I know you had an agenda. If you have an agenda to get them to stop tantruming, you are using gentle parenting to control your child. It's still control. It's just
So-
with a pleasant voice.
So your kid is having a temper tantrum, and in the throes of it, you're becoming dysregulated. What are you meant to do? Step out of the room?
If you
literally?
have to, if that's the only way you can get it together, you don't have to come down all the way. So I want to point out, regulated doesn't mean you're calm. Regulated means you're in control of the dial.
It means that you're not in your amygdala yet. You still have some of your prefrontal cortex is online. You can still contemplate the consequences of your actions. You can still think strategically.
Yes, exactly. Because you don't, to be zen, to be calm is not possible in all situations. And if you're getting triggered, your amygdala is going
That's
off.
dysregulating to a kid. Like a parent that looks completely, I don't know, like they had a lobotomy in the throes of this child, like so distraught. You want to be mirroring that you see that. So regulation doesn't mean having the blank antiseptic therapist stare of past, the ones that I grew up with.
Exactly. And it doesn't mean we have to be sort of like this Mr. Rogers kind of like that gentle, like we're doing the best we can, but I'm in control of my dial. So I'm going to model dysregulation with movement, right? So the child is dysregulated. And whatever they're doing, they're telling you, I hate you. You're the worst parent ever. They're throwing stuff, whatever. They're slamming doors. And that's a trigger for you. So then you get dysregulated, right? So now you have two dysregulated individuals. Basically, we're having an adult version of a temper tantrum, right? Don't you dare talk to me that way, or I'll show you, or I'm going to take this over. We're both dysregulated. And there's no healthy person in this dynamic to bring either one of them down, right? So what we need in this situation is a regulated adult for the dysregulated child to borrow regulation from. There's no such as self-regulation when they're young. They don't have self-regulation. There's only co-regulation. So you're regulated while they're dysregulated, and they're borrowing your regulation. So whether you're validating their feelings, or you're just in the room with them, keeping them safe, or you're listening, they're borrowing that. And then that's how they learn to regulate themselves. And then this little giraffe becomes a big giraffe that goes on to have a healthier relationship, because when their partner is dysregulated, we're not both doing this. And we all know, if we're in a relationship, we all know what it looks like when we're both like this. It's a mess. But kids don't self-regulate. They co-regulate.
They need to borrow from the adult in the room. They need to anchor onto our groundedness, our centeredness.
That's right.
And that's how they learn to manage their emotions. So it's not just that we're modeling to them, this is what it looks like to be in control. But when we are in control, we can then help regulate them.
Exactly. And when we're regulated, we can access so much creativity that in the moment, you don't have to like, oh, what was the script? What was I supposed to say? You're like, you kind of have more instinct
Mm-hmm.
because you're regulated. Whereas when we're dysregulated, this is an emergency. I'm in an emergency situation and the house is on fire right now.
Mm-hmm.
Regulated, it's like, this doesn't mean anything about me. Doesn't mean anything about me as a parent or a person. It doesn't mean anything about my child. Neither one of us are broken. Neither one of us needs to be fixed. We're just people having emotions and
Mm.
ride this out together. And then afterwards, it's so juicy. If you do that with your child and at the end of whatever is going on, you're both like, wow, that was a lot, but we did that together. Come here, give me a hug. Or if your child doesn't like hug, like, wow, just that was so much. But I'm so
What's
glad
up
we're on
with
the
that, these kids who don't like hugs? What is up with that?
sensory. It is
Really?
okay. It is okay for a kid not to like a hug. It feels overwhelming from a sensory perspective. And this idea that we're supposed to give hugs and, grandparents come and they want the hugs and the kid doesn't want to give a hug. And we're like, come on, hug your grandparents. That's disrespectful. No, that's body
Well,
boundaries.
there isn't value in learning that you have to behave socially appropriately for a small period of time, like 10 seconds for a hug.
Nope. We live in a world. So just like um, racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, we've got an ableist mindset about these things. These are neurotypical standards of behavior. You make eye contact, you make benign small talk. How are you? I'm fine. How are you? I'm fine. Well, no one's fine. Who's fine? Do you know people who are fine? But no one's like verbal diarrhea. But we do it, right? Um, these are neurotypical social expectations. Neurodivergent people think it's weird.
I know they do.
Eyeballs
I
are
know
going to
they
stare
do.
into your eyeballs. And in some cultures in the world, it's disrespectful to make eye contact. So we've just decided eye contact is important and saying certain things is important. And so what happens is these neurodivergent kids learn to mask. And masking means I'm going to do what I need to do to be accepted by a neurotypical society, but I'm completely disconnecting and dishonoring what feels good or safe for me. And then by the time they're teenagers or young adults, they have no idea who they are and they're depressed and they're anxious. And they have a lot of mental health issues because they've been trying to mask. Whereas if we just made the world friendly for all, neurotypes, then we would put these arbitrary rules aside. I mean, yeah, we can't leave the house without clothes on. Like, we're not gonna like get rid of all the rules, but like, let's just be a little flexible with some of this stuff.
I do worry about how that sets them up to advance in the workplace and make their way through life because I don't think the whole world is as sophisticated as Dr. Weberman is. And
It's
I worry about that, but I hear your point. So what are we teaching parents these days about how to fight when you have kids? Do we still do it behind closed doors? Do we do it in front of them?
so we have to define fighting, right? Like that, because it's a big word. There's arguing, there's bickering, there's screaming and yelling and throwing things at each other. There's name calling. I mean, what are we talking about with fighting? So
I
my
can tell
question
you,
is,
like I'm at a 0 to 10 on a dysregulation spectrum. 0 is neutral on dysregulation. 10 is the most dysregulated imaginable. I'm in my amygdala. I'm not in control of my emotions. And Steph has hurt me
mm-hmm,
in the moment. Do
mm-hmm.
I let my response happen in front of her?
Okay, so that's a great question, right? So you're at a 10. How
I'm
much
not at a 10. I'm probably at a 7.5, 8.
Yes, but if you're at a 10, you're not in control. This is the whole point. If you're in fight, flight, or freeze, you no longer have control. So we really want to make sure we're not getting to a 10 as often as possible, especially in front of our children. But if we're at a 7, there's just a little bit of like prefrontal cortex activity there that can get you to the bathroom. I heard a lot of parents go to the closet. If you have a walk-in closet, you shut the door, you're in the closet crying, you're in the bathroom crying, you're in the shower crying, like you go somewhere and you just get yourself down to at least a 5.
Okay.
so that you're regulated when you're disagreeing with your partner. So your children can see that, yes, disagreements happen, but nobody's calling anyone names. No one's like hurling really below the belt kind of insults. And no one's modeling like toxic forms of disagreeing. But you can say, when you did, and when you said X, it made me feel this way. And, you and your partner kind of work on that communication skill. Then your kids see, one, it is okay to disagree. And this is how you let someone know that they've crossed the boundary. So this is how I can let someone know that they've crossed my boundary, and it can resolve. Even if it doesn't resolve in that moment, it can resolve eventually. So fighting isn't dangerous, because how many people in relationships now, as soon as they have their first fight, they're like, oh, well, I guess that's
Wrong
it,
partner.
right? Wrong partner. So fighting is not dangerous. Disagreeing is not dangerous. It's how we can and then repair afterwards, right? So we can have a healthy disagreement and then repair afterwards. And then ask your kids, like, if you think it was a little too much for them, check in with them. Hey, dad and I, mom and I had a disagreement before. I'm just wondering if you had any questions about that, or were you okay? I saw you kind of got quiet. Just notice them and care about their response. But no, we cannot be robots in front of our kids. Like, that's just weird and creepy, and it doesn't teach them anything that will prepare them for later.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Teenagers are never going to be like, you know what? Here's how all that made me think and feel, and here's what I need you guys to work on. They're going to be like, fine,
I didn't
whatever.
even notice.
I don't care. Yeah. But inside, oh, there's a lot going on in there that they're just got their poker face on, right? But inside, they're feeling and thinking so much more than they're showing. And, they might share it with their therapist, they might not, but yeah, they're so good at hiding it.
I think a hot topic right now at the top of people's minds, parents' minds, is at what age do we give our kids a phone? And then at what age do we allow them on social media?
Mm.
What's the guideline there?
So there was a big push, wait till 8th grade, right? That was what we heard for a really long time. And now you see kindergartners walk around with smartphones. And so
Do you really?
yeah.
I did not. No, I didn't know that.
It's I'm not saying it's all of them, but you definitely start seeing it earlier and earlier and earlier. And so then it becomes the issue of, okay, well, now I'm holding out for my kid, but there are social situations that they're missing out on. Like, everyone's in this group chat or everyone's Snapchatting and my kid can't participate. And so there's no easy answer, but I would rather turn the table on the question and talk about a parent's use of their phone and social media and
Ooh,
how
I
it
love
impacts
that.
children.
Yes, let's do
That is
that.
something we don't talk about enough, right? You have, well, I mean, parents, like, they're on Facebook, right? Or Instagram. That's where they're posting their kids. So what do they post? Okay, like, all right, the good stuff. My kid made honor roll, or they came back with a good report card, or their sports team won the tournament, or all the good stuff. And when they post pictures, I mean, have you ever been around a parent getting a picture of their kids where they're like, stop making that weird face, just smile, don't touch your brother, like, just do this, do this, do this, do this, and then the kids finally give a smile, and it's like not real, it's not representative of the moment they just had, and they all go back to screaming at each other, but they post that picture and they're like, family memories, blah blah blah. So we're doing that, but then we're also telling intimate stories about our children on social media. We're posting embarrassing things about them. We're doing all these tricks so that we can see their temper tantrums. We're complaining about their behavior on social media. And eventually those kids are going to find your account when they're older and watch everything you think and feel about them. So what is the message that kids are getting based on their parents' use of social media? This is when I'm valued. This is when I'm lovable. This is when you're going to pay attention to me. This is what makes me important. Oh, my grades. When when I'm on honor roll, you love me more. That's when you brag about me. But you didn't mention that, test I got a C on. So I guess I need to be a perfect student. And then what if you have multiple kids and one of them is not a good student and you're always bragging about kid A's report card and kid B is not getting bragged about? Or this was the athlete and he's so good and this one is not, so you're not posting about them. So how that impacts their perception of themselves, or how we just stare at our phone at
Mhm.
the
And
window.
ignore
We're
them.
watching our kids on the swing like this. And they're like, Mom, Dad, look at me. And you're like, oh, that's great. Yeah. And then you're like, you're addicted to your screens. You've got to control your screen time and we can't get off our phone. So how many times do we see our children seeking our attention while
Mhm.
we're staring at our phone,
Our
or
children, our pets,
everything?
our partners,
Our partners, our
they're
friends.
yeah.
Yeah. So that's what I think we need to tune into. And this is when I say, like, we can't expect our kids to be performing at a higher level than we are. If like our screen use is down here, like meaning we're really
Yeah.
you have no control. You can't hand a smartphone to a child with an undeveloped brain and expect them to be better at managing it. They're not. You give your kid a phone, they're not going to be good at managing it. That is like, and you can't say, oh, well, I'm going to threaten to take this away. Like, no, you're handing them a gun and then expecting them to have good aim, or you're handing them something dangerous and
Mhm.
expecting them not to get hurt. So they are going to misuse it. So you've really, really got to check in with yourself and your expectations if you're going to do that, because we suck at it.
Mhm. So you're not gonna answer the question,
Nope.
what age is social media literally? You're just okay.
And I will say they do make a new phone now where it looks exactly like it is a smartphone. It looks exactly like a smartphone, but you cannot put social media apps on it. The music that you download is only the clean versions, not the explicit versions, and it won't have internet connection.
For me, the biggest reason I wanted to do this episode is that so often parents are confused by how their children turn into young adults with their relationship skills and don't see the connection of how they developed those relationship skills. They're learning from us. They're watching and listening even when they seem distracted, even when they look checked out. They learn more from what we do than what we preach. So where does that leave human parents?
I always, when I do workshops, parent workshops, I always start the workshop with a story about one of my parenting fails. And I've got a lot of really good stories that are funny to tell, but when I was living them in the moment, they were my worst nightmare. Airports scare me now because I've had some of my worst parenting moments at
I
airports.
can only imagine.
And you said the germs on the floor. I mean, that's one of my triggers, but also being viewed, just knowing that people can see me, not in control of my child my child's older now, but like when they were younger, just like flailing on the floor. And I'm
Oh,
thinking,
right.
you're dirty,
You're the
you're
parent.
germy, and
You're
they're going to make me late.
literally, and you're the parent coach.
Yes. Yes, which is why I start all my workshops with these stories. There is a flight that I know I would have missed if the TSA agent didn't come over and see that I needed help and helps me with my tantruming child. That there's no way I would have gotten on that flight. We would have missed it. So I always start with a story about a parenting failure because I need everyone to know there's nobody who's like, I'm nailing this parenting thing. Like, I am zen. I know how to respond to everything. I've worked out all my wounds from childhood. So, like, you've got to be human. I'm human. We're all going to make mistakes. So, embracing that reality that this is going to be messy, what can we do? Right. So, one is working on ourselves. We need to work on ourselves. We need to work on regulation skills. Two is modeling. So, you have frustrations throughout the day. Why don't you model the better way to handle it? Like, and don't point out that you're modeling it, just do it. Like, live your values, practice what you preach, basically, right? So, all the little frustrations of your life, you're driving the car, someone cuts you off, you respond how you want your kids to learn to respond. And 3, the way you're arguing or disagreeing with your partner. 4, the way you validate your children's feelings and reflect it and show that you can handle them is going to teach them I'm enough. Most of the things that we do as adults is because we don't think we're enough, that we don't think we're lovable or worthy or whatever. We're stupid. We're whatever we believed from our child. We're too much. We're too sensitive. So if you teach your child that they're enough, not that they're perfect, not that they're good at everything, but that the core of them is good, that's huge. So they don't take all that garbage into future relationships. And you work on knowing that you're enough. And if you don't believe you're enough, it's because some unhealed person who raised you had you believe that.
Yeah.
And, we can stop this cycle of repeating it over and over. That's why I love parents who want to come in and break intergenerational patterns. I'm like, you're warriors. That's hard stuff because that's coming from like great grandparents who've been doing it and doing it and doing it. So, break these cycles, pay attention to your triggers, see those triggers as breadcrumbs to follow, and then find out where that's coming from. And I can give you a list of examples, like, the day is long of like, okay, if this is your trigger, let's look at this. If this is your trigger, let's look at this. And then be curious about your children's behavior. Where is it coming from? What are they trying to communicate? Like most of the time, I said it's either I need safety or I need connection. So when your child is telling you off or throwing a fit or being rigid or stubborn, where is this coming from? Get curious what's underneath the surface, and then try and modify the environment to better meet that kid's needs.
That's such sage advice. When are you writing your first book? Like literally you need to write this. You need to write this down.
I need someone to just stand next to me and I'll just spew and they write it down and make it make sense because I can't write a book, but I have a book in my head.
I definitely want you to tell people how they can connect with you and tap into some of Dr. Weberman's resource, the resource of you, because I know you do workshops and I know you do parenting groups.
So what I would say is follow me on my socials. I'm on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook. I have all these little snippets. The virtual parenting group that I do, a 6-week virtual parenting group, if you live in New Jersey or New York, which are the 2 states I'm licensed in, you are eligible to do it. Email me that you're interested in it. It comes with a workbook. I have a workbook for each week of the 6 weeks. So you're going to get journal prompts. I love visuals. I'm a very visual thinker. So yeah, I can describe a parenting technique, but I also want you to see what that looks like. And then I'm going to have you deep dive into some of the things that happened, the messages you internalize as a child that are impacting how you respond to your child now. I do a lot of teacher workshops too, where I talk about these neurodivergent kids that are dysregulated in the classroom and how you can use connection in the classroom to foster more regulation amongst the students. Because you ask any teacher right now, they'll tell you these are the most dysregulated students they've ever seen in their career. So those are the workshops that you can reach out to me about. And eventually, I will turn my 6-week virtual parenting group into an e-course, maybe a year from now. And then if you're on my mailing list, you'll know about it when that time comes.
What is your email?
So it's jw@transformationstherapycenter.com, transformations with an S, and I'll put it in your links and stuff. So yeah, email me and I'll put you on my mailing list.
Jennifer, this was so packed full of parenting dialogue and tips and concepts and paradigm shifts. I'm so grateful for your time today. Thank you so much for joining me.
Darcy, I adore you. I respect you. And I so appreciate that you gave me this opportunity to come on and speak to you. Thank you.
We Need to Talk with Dr. Darcy Sterling is a Sterling Standard production. This episode was produced by me, Darcy Sterling, with editorial support from Vicky Vergolina, editing and sound engineering by Bart Migal. Our theme music is by Trending Music. Special thanks to Amanda Cristiani, Preston Smith, and my beautiful wife, Stephanie Sterling. If you know someone who could use parenting support, please share this episode with them. We'll be back on Tuesday with another episode packed with the relationship, dating, and mental health hacks you've come to expect.